The city smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet, that heavy, pressed-down kind of air that sits in your chest and makes everything feel like a warning. The cobblestones in the old quarter were already dark with humidity, the lamplight pooling in yellow patches between the buildings, and the alleys, the narrow, forgotten alleys between the market district and the river, breathed a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Darian Vane walked alone. He always walked alone. This was not recklessness. This was the thing he had decided about himself a long time ago, in a room he didn't think about anymore, on a night he had compressed into a single word and buried under everything else. Bodyguards were a statement. They told the world, I can be reached through the people around me. Darian had no intention of being reached through anything or anyone. He was the Alpha King. The word meant different things to different people. To the lords who sat across from him at negotiation tables, it meant danger dressed in restraint. To the common people of the 3 territories he governed, it meant stability. Cold, efficient, consistent stability. To the 6 men who had been following him for the last 9 minutes through 3 turns of the old quarter, it meant a target that had finally walked somewhere worth using. He knew they were behind him. He had known since the 2nd turn. He counted them without looking. 3 sets of footfall rhythms, 2 practiced to be drunks, 2 spread apart to be a single group of friends. Then 2 more sets when he turned onto the river lane, 1 more hanging back near the arch. 6. The alley ahead narrowed. He walked into it anyway, because the interesting thing about the 6 men was not that they were there, the interesting thing was who had sent them. The alley was 8 feet wide at its entrance and 5 feet wide at the other end, where it turned sharply left toward the waterfront. Tall buildings on both sides, no windows at street level, a single rope of laundry strung between 2nd-floor balconies 15 feet above, 1 lamp at the entrance, 1 at the far turn, and total darkness in the middle stretch. A perfect box. He stopped in the middle of the dark stretch and waited. They materialized from both directions. 4 from behind, 2 from the far end. They had circled, which meant someone had planned this with a map and a clock. These were not opportunists. They were a message, delivered in the form of 6 bodies in a narrow space. Darian looked at them. He did not reach for the blade at his hip. He said, "You're short too." The man at the front, big, scarred along one cheekbone, the kind of person whose whole life had been a series of solved problems that all required the same solution, tilted his head, a question without words. "To take me," Darian said, still in that flat conversational tone. "You're too short. Whoever sent you undercalculated." The big man smiled. It was not a warm smile. "We've handled bigger. I'm sure you have." The circle tightened. 3 feet of space on every side now, which was efficient, close enough to act, far enough to avoid each other's elbows. Someone had drilled them. Darian registered this, filed it. His left hand stayed at his side, relaxed against the ache in his palm that had lived there for 3 weeks now. Since the border incident he had not reported to his counsel. He was tired, not afraid. Tired in the specific way that comes from weeks of holding everything together through sheer force of attention, and the summit had taken more than he wanted to admit, and his hand hurt, and he had calculated that he could take 4 of these men before the remaining 2 became a real problem, and he was doing that math very calmly and very quietly behind a face that gave nothing away. The big man raised one hand, a signal, and then a bucket hit the cobblestones. The sound cracked through the alley like a stone thrown through glass. All 6 men turned. She was standing at the alley entrance, not running, not hiding, standing with the specific stillness of someone who had decided to be exactly where they were and had no further questions about it. She was holding a lantern in her left hand, the light throwing shadows up the walls in long, wavering shapes. Her dark dress, the estate uniform, plain cotton, nothing remarkable, was damp at the hem from the streets. Her hair was pulled back, a few strands loose against her jaw. She had an expression that could have been described as neutral, except that neutral usually means nothing is happening behind the eyes, and this was the opposite of that. The bucket was at her feet. She had not dropped it by accident. One of the 6 men, smaller, faster-looking, the one Darian had clocked as the most dangerous in the group, turned fully toward her and took a step. He stopped, not because of anything she did, because of the way she looked at him. The way a door looks when it is closed and locked, and has been that way for a very long time, and is completely unbothered by the fact that you are standing in front of it. "Wrong night," she said. "Walk away." The man actually laughed. The sound bounced off the stone walls and came back smaller. "You lost, girl?" She didn't answer. She moved, not toward him. She moved diagonally, unhurried, and placed herself at a very specific point. 3 feet to Darian's left, half a step forward, body angled to keep both groups visible. It was not a dramatic entrance. It was not a performance. It was pure geometry, executed with the familiarity of someone who had thought about exactly this position before and knew precisely what it meant to stand there. Darian's jaw tightened. His left side. She had placed herself at his left side, the side he had not favored, had not adjusted his stance around, had not shown any preference about in all the weeks since the border incident. He had been careful. He was always careful. She knew. The big man looked at her, then at Darian, then back at her. "This your woman?" Darian said nothing. She said, "Irrelevant." "You should leave," the big man said. Reasonable. Almost kind, the way certain professionals are kind. "This has nothing to do with you. It will, in about 30 seconds, she said. "If you stay." Something shifted in the alley. Darian felt it, the particular shift that happens in a standoff when the equation changes and everyone present is trying to figure out how and in what direction. 6 men who had walked into this box with complete confidence were now running a new calculation, not because of her size, which was unimpressive, not because of what she was holding, which was a lantern and nothing else visible, because of what she said next. She said a name, not loudly, barely above the quiet of the alley, the way you say something you've been saving for exactly the right moment, and you know it's the right moment, because of the way the air changes when you say it. The name she said was Voss, and she said it the way you would say the name of a river to someone who is standing at its edge, not as information, but as a reminder of what rivers do. The man at the back of the group, the one who had been hanging near the arch, the one Darian had marked as the coordinator, made a sound. Small sound, barely a sound, the kind that happens when a body understands something before the brain has finished forming the thought. He took 1 step back, then another. The big man turned to look at him. Something passed between them. Not words, just a look, and Darian watched the big man's expression do something complicated and then settle into something that looked remarkably like reassessment. "Voss is gone," the big man said, but his voice had a different texture now, slightly drier, the way a voice gets when it is saying a thing it is not fully sure of. "One of us is," she agreed. The lantern flame in her hand didn't waver. She was completely, absolutely still, the kind of still that is not absence of movement, but complete presence. Like a clock that has stopped, like a compass at true north. The man near the arch took a 3rd step back and then turned and walked away. Not running, walking, deliberately, the way someone leaves a place where they have just decided they have no business being. Then another. A smaller man near the far end of the alley, who had not said anything the entire time, simply turned and walked toward the river end and disappeared around the corner. The remaining 4 looked at each other. The big man looked at her one more time. She looked back at him with an expression that was patient and complete and absolutely empty of uncertainty. He left. The others followed. The alley was quiet. The laundry above swayed slightly in the air from the waterfront. The lamp near the entrance held its small, determined flame. The bucket sat on its side against the left wall. Darian did not move immediately. He stood in the middle of the dark stretch of the alley and breathed, slowly, through the tiredness and the leftover math of what had almost been, and he looked at Alara, the woman his household called the Maid, the woman who had been at the Vane estate for 14 months, who had never been late, never been loud, never been anything except exactly what every surface of her presented, and he looked at her for a long moment the way he had looked at the 6 men, counting, recalculating, starting from 0. She picked up her bucket. She checked the lantern flame with 2 fingers, angled it slightly, normal, like a person who had just set something down and was picking it up again. Like nothing remarkable had just happened in an alley at the edge of the old quarter on a night that smelled like rain that wouldn't come. "How long?" he said. His voice was the same, flat, controlled. The same voice he used in council, in negotiation, in every room where he needed the temperature to stay down. But underneath it, not visible, not performed, just there, was the particular quality of a man who has just discovered that something he believed to be a wall is in fact a door. She didn't answer right away. She adjusted the lantern handle. She looked at the bucket and found it undamaged. She looked at the entrance of the alley, where 6 men had been, and were now not. "Long enough," she said. He didn't ask anything else. She didn't explain anything else. She walked to the alley entrance and paused there, not looking back, but pausing, the kind of pause that acknowledges a presence without turning to face it. "The route back through the market will be clear," she said. "The other 2 they left in reserve, pulled out when these 6 did. They'll report to whoever sent them that the engagement failed and you survived. That buys you until Thursday." She waited 1 beat. "You should have someone look at your hand." Then she walked into the street, and the lamp at the entrance swallowed her shadow, and she was gone. Darian Vane stood in the alley alone. He looked at his left hand. He had not adjusted for it once tonight. Not once. And he had been paying attention to that. He was always paying attention to that, because it was the kind of weakness that gets people killed if it becomes visible, and he had been managing the visibility with the careful, exhausting precision of a man who manages everything carefully and exhaustingly and alone. She had seen it anyway. Somehow, through 14 months of being the woman who carried things and kept accounts and appeared at the edges of rooms and disappeared just as efficiently, she had seen it, had tracked it, had known exactly which side to stand on in an 8-foot-wide alley in the dark. He breathed. His hand hurt. He started walking toward the market route. Elara Voss had not planned to be in the old quarter that night. She had planned to be 20 minutes across the city, at the estate, finishing the quarterly linen inventory, a job she had invented for herself because the estate had needed a system and she had needed a reason to be in every room of the building at least once a week. Inventory was an excellent reason. No one questioned the woman with the ledger. No one looked twice at the woman who already knew which floorboards creaked and which hallways had line of sight to the main gates and which windows on the 3rd floor faced the road that the Alpha King always used when he returned from the council building alone. She had not planned to be in the old quarter, but she had been watching his schedule for 14 months, and the summit ran 3 hours over, which meant he would leave from the old council building, rather than the new one, which meant the route through the old quarter was the most direct, which meant the alley by the laundry ropes was the only efficient box on that route. She had done the math faster than whoever sent the 6 men had done it, which was the point. The math was always the point. She walked back toward the estate, through streets that were quieter now, the night crowd thinning, the vendors packing their carts, a dog sleeping in a doorway with the absolute conviction of a creature that has solved every relevant problem. She walked at the pace of someone going home after a normal shift. She set the bucket down twice to rest her arm. She did not think about the alley. She thought about the linen inventory, which she would still finish tonight because she had said she would, and she did not let herself not finish things she had said she would. She thought about the fact that he had not asked about the name. Not the name she had said in the alley. That was tactical. She had said it the way you would brandish any tool that works, without ceremony. But her name. He had known who she was. He had called her Elara from the first week, which surprised her, because most of the lords and senior staff referred to her as the inventory girl, or simply the maid. But her family name had never come up. She had offered a different one when she arrived. It was not a lie exactly. It was a face she wore over a face. 7 years. She had been wearing it for 7 years. The night she decided to leave that life behind, she had stood in a burned room with her hands covered in ash that was not all from the building, and she had made one decision. Small. Small and quiet and completely invisible. A closed door. A still clock. True north. It had worked. It had almost worked. She reached the estate's side entrance and pulled out her key and let herself in and went upstairs to count linens, and she was good at counting things, so she finished faster than expected, and she sat in the small room off the laundry, where she kept her ledger and her extra ink and the 3 books she owned, and she looked at the wall, and she thought, "He said tomorrow." She pressed her fingers against the ledger's cover. The leather was cool, solid. She had bought this ledger with the first month's wages, from a job she had chosen on purpose, in a house she had chosen on purpose, in a city she had chosen on purpose, because she had decided, after the burned room, that if she was going to exist in the world, she was going to do it on her own terms and nobody else's. 14 months. He had said tomorrow. She opened the ledger and wrote down the linen count and closed it and went to bed. In the morning the estate moved the way it always moved, with the particular organized energy of a large household where everyone knew their job and the consequences of not doing it. The kitchens ran from before dawn. The ground staff appeared with their tools. The senior staff had their morning briefing in the east sitting room, and Alara attended it the way she always attended it, at the back of the room, ledger in hand, adding items to the week's supply list, while the housekeeper ran through schedules and the head of security confirmed the patrol rotations. She was very good at being in the back of a room. It was a skill. She had worked at it. The briefing ended. People dispersed. Alara was making a note about the east wing window latch. It needed replacing. She had been noting it for 2 weeks, when the head of household staff, an older man named Corvin, who had been at the estate since before Darian inherited it, and who had the energy of a person who had seen everything twice and had opinions about all of it, appeared at her elbow. "He wants to see you," Corvin said. "Study, now." He walked away before she could say anything, which was efficient of him. There was not much to say. She closed the ledger, straightened her dress, the same uniform, a fresh one, exactly the same as every other day. She walked through the estate the way she always walked through it. Direct route, steady pace, no rush, no hesitation. The study was on the 2nd floor, south end, with windows that faced the garden and, beyond the garden wall, the road she had watched for 14 months. She knocked. "Come in." Darian was standing at the window when she entered, not seated behind the desk. The desk was for formal meetings, for council members and visiting lords, and petitioners with appointments. He was at the window, looking at the garden, and he had clearly been awake for several hours, which she knew because his 2nd cup of the morning was on the windowsill and the 1st was already cleared. He did not turn around when she entered. "Close the door." She closed it. The study was quiet. Books on 2 walls, a fireplace on the 3rd, the desk with its papers and its order. No other staff, no council members, no witnesses of any kind. She stood in the center of the room and waited. "Voss," he said, still at the window, still looking at the garden. She said nothing. "Not a common name," he said. "Not common at all. In fact, if I try to think of the last time I heard that name said in a context that wasn't historical, I have to go back quite far. 12 years, she said. The Voss line was formally declared ended at the Thornfield Accords. 12 years ago. Formally, he said. Formally, she agreed. He turned from the window. She had worked in his household for 14 months. She had been in this room probably 40 or 50 times. Inventory, delivery sign-offs, the occasional query from Corvin that required her to bring documentation directly. She had looked at him the way you look at something you are cataloging. Clear-eyed, functional. Not the way you look at a person in a room who is now looking directly at you with an expression that is attempting to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. You weren't supposed to be in that alley, he said. No, you were supposed to be here. Inventory. I finished it last night. Something moved through his expression. Not amusement. Close to it. Before or after the alley. After. That thing moved again. He looked at the window, then at her, and he had the expression of a man who is doing a calculation he hadn't expected to need to do and is finding the numbers more complicated than anticipated. Sit down, he said. I'm fine standing. Ilara. She sat. He moved from the window and sat in the chair across from her. Not behind the desk, not the power position, just the chair. Across. Equal distance. She noticed this, the way she noticed everything. Filed, assessed, held. "Tell me how long you've been tracking my movements," he said. 14 months. The whole time. The whole time. And the injury. I noticed the third week. The way you set a glass down changes when your grip is compromised on the left. You overcorrect with the right. You've been managing it for 3 weeks, which means it happened around the border incident you didn't report. He was very still. "I have very good eyes," she said. "Apparently." He looked at his hand. The same look from the alley. Private. Almost involuntary. Then he looked at her again. "The men last night. You knew the name would move them. I knew it would move at least 2 of them, which would break the formation. Once the formation breaks, the math changes. And if it hadn't worked..." She considered this. "The bucket is solid iron. The one at the back, the coordinator, had his weight on his left foot. I would have had approximately 4 seconds of disorientation to use." He stared at her. She waited. "You," he said, and then he stopped, which was unusual because Darian Vane was not a person who stopped in the middle of sentences. "You are not who you presented yourself as when you arrived at this estate." "I am exactly who I presented myself as," she said. "I presented myself as someone who does the work, keeps the accounts, and causes no trouble. All of that was accurate. You presented yourself as a maid. I am a maid. I am also other things. The two are not in conflict." The study held its quiet. Outside the window, a bird landed on the garden wall and sat there for a moment and flew away. "The Voss ability," he said. "Marking. I was told it required direct contact. It doesn't. Then why haven't you?" "Because I don't use it," she said. Her voice didn't change. Same flat, even register. But something behind it. Not anger, not grief. Something older and more settled than either. Pressed against the surface like weather behind glass. "I haven't used it in 7 years. Last night I used the name. I used the reputation." That's different. He heard the thing behind the flatness. He was good at hearing things behind flatness. He had been a wall himself for long enough to know how walls sound from the inside. He did not ask what happened 7 years ago. He looked at her for a long moment. "Thursday," he said. "They'll move again before the end of the week. Whoever sent them doesn't waste resources on failed engagements. They recalibrate and try again faster." "I know." He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, the way someone leans when they are paying very close attention. "I meant I need to know who sent them before Thursday. And I have one person in this household who has been reading this estate, this city, and apparently me, with a precision that my entire council has not managed in 3 years. She looked at him. "I'm a maid," she said. "You're a Voss who has been pretending to be a maid for 14 months in the household of the person most likely to be targeted by the current political situation, which means either you're here to harm me, which last night's events argue against, or you're here for a reason you haven't told me." The room was very quiet. The fire had burned down to coals. She looked at the ledger in her hands. She had brought it in out of habit. She always brought it to the study. It was part of the presentation. The maid with the ledger, the inventory girl, the woman at the back of every room. She looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you are about to set down. She set it on the table between them. "The man who sent those 6 men," she said, "is the same man who arranged the border incident 3 weeks ago. He has been dismantling your external supports one piece at a time for 8 months. The injury to your hand is not the first thing he has arranged that you haven't reported. He is not trying to kill you, not yet. He is trying to isolate you, to make you the kind of target that can be taken cleanly, without a war, because by the time he moves openly, you will have no one left who can respond." Darian did not move. "His name is Renwick," she said. "He sits on your Western Trade Council. He has been in position for 2 years. I followed him here." The fire ticked in the grate. "You came here," Darian said slowly, "specifically to follow Renwick." "I came here because the last time Renwick targeted someone the way he is targeting you, I was in a room with that person when he burned it." She said it without emphasis, without any texture at all, the way you say a fact that is just a fact, and not the thing it cost you to know it. "I was the only person who walked out." She reached into the front of the ledger and pulled out a folded set of papers, 4 pages, dense with notes in a handwriting that was small, precise, and had clearly been written over the course of months in small pieces at various hours. She placed them on the table. "Everything I have on Renwick's network," she said. "Entry points, funding routes, the 3 council members he has already flipped, and the 2 he is currently working on. It won't be enough to move against him openly, not yet, but it should be enough to stop Thursday." He reached for the papers. She stood. "Ilara." She paused. "Why didn't you—" He stopped, started again. "You could have given me this at any point in the last 14 months. She looked at him. The morning light from the garden window was on the left side of her face, and the fire was behind her, and she looked, in that moment, like a person who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had gotten used to the weight and wasn't sure yet what her hands did without it. "I needed to know," she said, "whether you were worth the trouble." She picked up her bucket. She had left it by the door, the same bucket from the alley. She had carried it home and washed it and brought it to work because it was a good bucket and she was practical, and she walked out of the study. The door closed. Darian sat in the quiet room with 4 pages of intelligence that had just solved 8 months of a mystery and created a completely new one. He looked at the papers. He looked at the closed door. He looked at his left hand. Outside, from somewhere in the estate, he could hear the ordinary sounds of a morning in full motion. Corvin giving instructions to someone, the kitchen staff carrying something heavy through the corridor below, a window being opened somewhere on the upper floor. The sounds of a household running, doing what it did, the quiet machinery of other people's competence holding the world together, while the world's appointed ruler sat in his study and tried to recalculate what he knew about the woman who had been carrying his ledger for 14 months. He had thought he was alone. He was very good at being alone. He had organized his entire life around the specific competence of aloneness, the way it gave him angles no one else could see, the way it meant no one else's miscalculation could become his problem, the way it meant the only person he had to trust was the only person he trusted absolutely, which was himself. And then there was a woman with a bucket standing at the entrance of a dark alley, placing herself at his left side with the casual precision of someone who had done the geometry long before the moment arrived, and saying a name in a voice that had no performance in it whatsoever, and 8 months of carefully concealed, carefully accumulated, carefully organized information was sitting on his table in handwriting so small it must have been written by lamplight, probably late, probably after she had finished her inventory. He thought about the way she had said, "I needed to know whether you were worth the trouble." He thought about what it meant that she had stayed. He unfolded the first page. The notes were exactly as complete as she had indicated. Precise dates, names with sourced connections, movement patterns, 3 different routes through which Renwick was moving funds, one of which used a trade account that Darian's own counsel had cleared 6 months ago as a standard commercial arrangement. She had tracked it back to a holding company in the Eastern Territories and followed that holding company to a property in the Northern District that she had linked, with 4 documented steps, to Renwick himself. He turned the second page. He had a council of 14 advisors. He had a security operation with 40 staff. He had a network of informants across 3 territories that had cost him 12 years and significant amounts of money to build. She had done this with a ledger and good eyes. He thought, long enough. He put the papers down and looked at the fire for a moment, and then stood up and went to the door and opened it. Corvin was in the corridor, halfway down, carrying a dispatch. "Corvin." The older man stopped. "My lord, tell Ilara her ledger is in my study." A pause, 1 beat. "She can collect it when she has a moment. No rush." Corvin looked at him with the expression of a man who has been at this estate long enough to know when something is happening and wise enough not to ask what. "Of course, my lord." Darian went back into the study and closed the door and sat back down with the papers. Outside, the morning continued its ordinary motion. Carts on the road, birds on the garden wall, the city doing what cities do with complete indifference to the small, significant thing that had just shifted in a second-floor room between 2 people who both knew what it meant to be a wall and had just, quietly, without announcing it, acknowledged the door. In the east wing, Ilara was counting linens. She was very good at counting things. She counted the linens. She noted the ones that needed replacing. She wrote the numbers in the new ledger she had retrieved from her room, the spare one, the one she always kept, and she worked through the shelf systematically, and she did not think about the study. She thought about Thursday. She thought about Renwick, who was careful and patient, and had been building toward this for 2 years, with the particular focus of a man who had decided that what he wanted was worth every step it required. She knew how he thought. She had spent 3 years learning how he thought, in the before time, in the life she had compressed into 2 words and buried under 14 months of inventory and linens and floorboard sounds. She knew he would move again before the week was out. She knew also that the papers she had left on the table were enough to prevent Thursday, but not enough to stop what came after. For that, she would need access to information she didn't currently have, access that required a different kind of position than the back of every room. She finished the shelf. Move to the next one. The thing about making yourself small for a very long time is that it becomes structural. You build yourself around the smallness, and it holds you up, and without it you're not sure what is holding what anymore. She had been small for 7 years. She had been good at it. She had been so good at it that some mornings she had to actively remind herself of the shape of the thing she was, before she chose to be small, the way you remind yourself of a word in another language, carefully, deliberately, running the sounds through your mouth until they feel like something you know. She moved to the next shelf. He had asked why she hadn't given him the papers sooner. She had told him the true thing, that she needed to know whether he was worth the trouble. This was true, but it was not all of it. The rest of it was something she hadn't said and wasn't sure she was going to say, that watching him for 14 months had produced a feeling she hadn't accounted for when she arrived, a feeling she had no clean word for, which was unsettling because she had words for most things. He was difficult. Cold in the way that comes from discipline rather than nature. She could see the nature under the discipline, the way you can see water under ice when the light is at the right angle. He had made himself alone by choice, and he was very good at it, and it cost him things he didn't acknowledge and probably couldn't name. She knew a little about that. The window at the end of the linen room faced the road. She was not looking at it. She finished the inventory. She totaled the columns. She looked at the numbers and they were correct. She heard footsteps in the corridor. Not Corvin's, not any of the other staff. A specific rhythm. She had catalogued the sound of everyone in this estate months ago, and she knew this one the way you know a sound you have been listening for. He stopped outside the linen room. He did not come in. The door was open. She kept it open when she worked. Visibility in both directions. She had never stopped doing that, and he was in the corridor, and she was at the shelf. A pause. Then he said, without preamble, Renwick will move through the northern route first, not the council access point. He'll try to create an internal crisis, something that requires me to be in a specific place, at a specific time. She straightened, turned to look at him. He was standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and he looked like a man who had made a decision and was implementing it without further internal debate, because that was the most efficient use of the available time. I know, she said. The papers you gave me, you held them back deliberately. Not the timing, the content. There's more. There's more. What does accessing the rest require? She held the new ledger against her chest and looked at him steadily and said, me sitting across from you at the table instead of standing in the back of the room. A beat. Done. She looked at him for a moment longer. Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, nothing that anyone cataloging from a distance would have necessarily marked, but small and real, like the first fraction of a door opening. You should still have someone look at your hand, she said. I have a physician appointment this afternoon. Good. He looked at her for a moment the way he had looked at her in the alley, that particular look that was doing a new calculation, except now the calculation had more data, and the expression that went with it was less guarded than last time, or perhaps just differently guarded, like a wall with a window. Why this house? He said. Specifically, there were other ways to track Renwick. She thought about the burned room. She thought about the person who hadn't walked out. She thought about the 7 years of smallness and the specific, deliberate choice she had made about where to aim it. "You're the only person in 3 territories that he can't flip," she said. "I checked. He's tried twice. You didn't notice because you weren't looking for it, but you turned down both approaches on instinct without knowing what they were. That's—" She paused. "Rare." He was quiet for a moment. "What do I call you," he said, "if not the maid?" She thought about this. "Alara is fine," she said. "I've been Alara for a long time. I'm used to it." He nodded. One nod. Decisive. The way everything he did was decisive. "Thursday, then. We'll have a meeting. Proper one. With the actual information. Bring your complete notes. I'll need a chair at the table. You'll have one." He pushed off from the doorframe and left. She heard his footsteps going back down the corridor, steady and even, and she stood in the linen room with her spare ledger and the window that faced the road, and she breathed. Outside, the day was doing what days do, moving, carrying things from one end of itself to the other, cars on the road, birds on the wall, the city in its ordinary motion. She looked at the numbered shelves of the linen room. She thought, Thursday. She thought, a chair at the table. She thought about the burned room, briefly, the way you think about a scar when you run a finger over it, not to revisit the thing that made it, just to confirm that it is what it is, that it has edges now, that it is part of the landscape of you, and does not have the same power it used to. She opened the new ledger. She wrote Thursday at the top of a fresh page. Below it she wrote Renwick's name, and below that she wrote a list of everything she still knew that was not in those 4 pages. And the list was long, and her handwriting was small and precise, and the lamp was not on yet because the morning light was still enough, and she worked until she had everything down that needed to be down, and then she capped the pen and looked at what she'd written. She thought, worth the trouble. She closed the ledger. She went back to counting linens. She was very good at that.